Hello and welcome. This is the first of our project-based tutorials in our Excel 2013 course. This tutorial is a deviation from the content we've been following so far. It's a deep dive, if you will, where we are going to build up a relatively sophisticated household budget tracker over a couple of modules. This will help you build up your practical experience as well as your knowledge with a commonly used purpose for Excel. First things first, there's an example file with this tutorial which I'd like you to go ahead and download beforehand so that you can follow along. What you'll see when you open the document is something like what I have here on the screen. We have three worksheets. The first one for the moment is blank and it's going to stay that way in this tutorial. The second worksheet has the beginnings of this expenses breakdown and it's got some fairly ordinary household expenditures in them. And the third one has some lookup values which we're going to refer to in a moment. So to start with, click on the second worksheet, which is monthly expenses. And you'll see here we have a number of items that you would expect a typical household to spend on. We already have some values, figures, put in against these. You should also see that we have two values for each item. The first one is what the budgeted figure is, and the second one is what was really spent. There was also, in the second column, a category area, which is blank, and which we're going to populate in a moment. Then there's a column to show the difference between the projected and the actual spend. And finally, we're going to create a nice little in-cell graphic for each row to show how much of the total expense this item actually took up. So the first thing we need to do is create our categories. So if we go to the Data tab, you'll see I've actually created some categories of expenditure in here for you already. Let's stick with those. What you'll need to do is then select all these items, just drag and select over them. And before we go any further, what is a good idea to do is talk about why you want to do this. It's partly good practice as it ensures that we don't miss an item because of a misspelling or typing error. But also in a later tutorial, we're going to build a dashboard up to show how this family is doing against the household areas. And this isn't practical to do for all items, as you'll just end up with far too granular charts. This will become clearer later on, but for now, we're just going to do it so you can see how to. So our next step then is to select all these cells, no others. It's important that no others are selected, otherwise we'll have those appear in our drop-down list. That could include spaces. If you included a blank cell, that would appear in your drop-down list as well, which we don't want. So, with the cell selected, right-click and choose Define Name, and this little window appears. The name it picks up automatically what the first item in the range was that you selected. So I'm going to call this something else. I'm going to call this category list. The scope is the workbook, so it's lookupable, for want of a better phrase, from anywhere in the document and not just on this worksheet. Comment is literally just some free text comment about the name you defined, and the refers to just lists the cells that have been included in this category list rather. I'm going to click OK there. And that's that done. That is the name defined. You'll understand what defining the name means in a second. If we go back to the monthly expenses tab, what we then do, if we go to this category bit here, and then go to data, so if I could switch over to the data tab, go to data validation, and then data validation again. There's a number of options in here, most of those we're going to leave alone. What I want to do is change these validation criteria allow into list. We can leave those tick boxes as they are for now, and in the source I'm going to type equals category list. That's our name, and I'll click on OK. What you'll see here now in this cell is a drop down icon. If I click that, I've got all the elements to it in my data tab a moment ago. And I can say, so park trip, let's say that was to do with school. There we go, dental appointment. Notice that one doesn't have it yet. So what I need to do is select that and use my fill icon here with this little cross and drag that down across all of them. Now, yes, they're all set to school for now, and for the purpose of this tutorial, you could just leave it like that, but I'll leave you to go and actually change some of these, so you could do that, and you could choose what we've got there, medical, credit card, that would be finances, that kind of thing. So you can see how you'd build that up. So next we need to create our difference values, and this is fairly straightforward. So let's select cell E4, that's this one here, and then select the formula bar up here. Now there are two ways you could do this, and all we're really going to do is say take away from this the anticipated cost, the budgeted cost, what was actually spent, to give us the difference. So we could just say equals that minus that, press enter, and that gives our figure there. And what I want to do is change that into the same formatting as this cell, so I will change that to accounting. There we go. And I can then, if I want to do a similar thing to earlier, change that crossover by over the bottom right hand corner and drag that down. And it gives me all the values. There we go. So now I can see the difference on each line item between what was actually spent and what was projected to be spent. And you'll notice for the first one, there's actually a small minus there, so you can see it was a negative value. But that's not easy to see, and what you probably want to do is highlight any overspends particularly. So what we can do is use some conditional formatting for that. And I select all of these. I go to conditional formatting, highlight cells rules, and choose less than. So I want to highlight anything that's less than 0. So in there, I'm going to type 0. I don't really want to highlight the cells as well because that makes my table look a bit ugly. So I'm going to change this to just red text. Click OK. There we go. So now what it's doing, it will automatically highlight anything that was overspent with red text. So if I were to change this one, for example, to 50, the value automatically appears and it highlights it in red. I'm just going to undo that. There we go. So the final thing we want to do is create a nice little bar in the right hand side here in all these items, a little graphic to show the proportion of the total spend that that item was. And again, we're going to use conditional formatting for this. So what I need to do is click in that cell and say equals the real spend, enter. Notice it hasn't done anything yet. And I go conditional formatting, data bars, and I'll pick one I like. Let's go with a green one there. Okay. Now you can see at the moment it's filling the whole bar because it only knows about that one line. And if I do a similar thing and drag this down here, there we go. And you can now see quite quickly where the biggest expense items are without having to look at the numbers. So your rent obviously very high compared to a charity donation, for example. There we go. And now and you now have the beginnings of a useful household budget calculator. We'll come back to this after a few more tutorials, but hopefully this has given you a flavour of how to build up a useful workbook. Thanks for viewing, and we'll see you in the next tutorial.